Imagine trying to drive a winding highway at like 60 miles an hour, completely blindfolded. You have this vague map in your head, maybe a passenger occasionally whispering, outdated directions, but you cannot actually see the road in front of you.
Yeah, that's a terrifying thought.
Right. But that terrifying scenario is exactly what it's like to run a massive command economy without accurate data. And today, you and I are going to unpack how a seemingly dry mathematical concept, the sample survey, could have actually prevented the worst famine in human history.
And crucially, why strict ideological blindness stopped that math from ever being used. We're digging into a really fascinating research paper today by Tapan Sinha titled Indictment by Statistics.
Yeah, it's a brilliant paper. So, okay, let's unpack this. How does a massive nation find itself driving blindfolded in the first place?
Well, it fundamentally comes down to the architecture of a command economy. I mean, if
Mm,
you think about a market economy, price signals, supply demand, they all act as a dashboard for you.
right, like a feedback loop.
Exactly. They give you constant automatic feedback about what people want and, you know, what is scarce. But in a command economy, there are no market forces.
Yeah.
The state decides absolutely everything.
Every little detail.
Yeah, they dictate how much steel to forge, how much grain to plant, where every single resource is shipped.
Yeah.
So logically, to decide everything, the state has to count everything.
Which sounds impossible.
It is.
Yeah.
And that creates a massive structural tension. Because what happens when the math contradicts the political ideology of the people in charge?
Which is exactly what we see here. And, to understand why counting became a literal matter of life and death in China during the 1950s, we really have to look at the ideology they inherited from the Soviet Union.
So absolutely, the Soviet influence is key here.
Yeah, because there's this incredibly dark piece of history from 1923. Joseph Stalin is having a conversation with a high-ranking official named Lev Kamenev, and they're discussing how to capture the majority of the Communist Party. So Kamenev asks Stalin for his strategy, and Stalin basically replies that who votes or how they vote is completely unimportant. The only thing that matters is who counts the votes and how they are recorded.
Which is just a chillingly pragmatic view of power.
Yeah.
And, as a grim historical footnote, Stalin later had Kamenev executed.
Wow. Yeah, executed for treason, right?
Exactly, in 1936. But that core executive lesson that the act of counting itself is a mechanism of control and therefore, inherently suspicious, it permeated the entire USSR.
And so that mindset just gets exported.
Yeah, by extension, it infected the systems in China that modeled themselves after Moscow. The act of gathering data wasn't seen as an objective science. It was essentially a political weapon.
And the sheer scale, what they were trying to count with this weaponized data is it's mind-boggling. Like, by 1965, the USSR had over 2 million statisticians and bookkeepers trying to centrally control over 20,000 different products.
2 million people just counting.
Right. Now look at China in the 1950s. They had a population 3 times larger than the Soviet Union, but their state statistical bureau only had about 200,000 employees.
Which is nothing for a country that size.
Exactly. And those 200,000 people were trying to manually control fewer than 600 products across this absolutely massive geographic area.
You also have to consider the severe technological gap here. Because when we hear 2 million statisticians,
Yeah.
our modern brains automatically picture like massive server farms and computers.
Like algorithms, spreadsheets.
Yeah, but the Soviet Union in the 1950s, they weren't using mainframes. They largely relied on traditional Russian abacuses and these hand-crank brass calculators called Felix arithmometers.
Wait, hand crank?
Literally hand-cranked.
Yeah.
And they couldn't even manufacture enough of those simple machines because almost all the available steel in the country had been diverted to the military and to heavy industry.
That is wild. So you have a continent-sized country trying to count every single item by hand. The resulting inaccuracy must have been just staggering.
Oh, it was. Take China's first national population census in 1953. When they finally tallied it all up, they realized they had undercounted their own population by 20%.
20%?
Yeah, they suddenly found an unexpected 100 million extra people living in their country.
That is the population of a major European nation, just like completely overlooked. But this is where the logic kind of breaks down for me. If counting is so structurally vital to keeping the country running, Why insist on counting every single thing one by one?
Right. It seems terribly inefficient.
I mean, it's like trying to understand a beach by insisting on counting every individual grain of sand instead of just, scooping up a handful to see what it's made of.
What's fascinating here is that the Soviet system actually demanded that grain of sand method. It was called complete enumeration.
Complete enumeration. Okay.
Yeah, they genuinely believed you had to count every single item to have true control. Anything less, like taking a sample, was considered mathematically lazy or even bourgeois.
So they forced themselves into this impossible task.
Exactly. And compounding the problem, the data they did manage to collect through complete enumeration was treated as a highly sensitive state secret.
Oh, of course. Everything's a secret.
Right. In the 1920s, the Soviet first five-year plan was published as 4 massive detailed volumes of data. But by the time they hit the 5th five-year plan in the 1950s, that public data had shrunk down to a mere 3-page summary printed in the newspaper Pravda.
Wow, from 4 volumes to 3 pages.
Yeah, the data was moving up the chain to the top brass, but it was completely vanishing from public reality.
Man, when you realize that counting every grain of sand is physically impossible, especially in a sprawling, largely agrarian society like China, where you literally cannot count every stalk of wheat, you hit a crisis.
You hit a wall.
And you are faced with a desperate choice, right? Admit your system is broken or look outside your ideological bubble for help. And that desperation drove Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai to do something almost unthinkable in 1956.
Right, the trip to India.
Yeah, he launched this major diplomatic mission to India to visit the Indian Statistical Institute, the ISI, in Calcutta, specifically to meet with a brilliant statistician named P C Mahalanobis.
And, the geopolitical tension surrounding this visit really cannot be overstated. Just 1 year prior, in 1955, there was the Kashmir Princess incident, which nearly derailed all Asian diplomacy.
Oh, this story's crazy.
It is. The Kashmir Princess was an Air India plane chartered to fly Zhou Enlai to a major conference. But a Taiwanese KMT spy, funded by the CIA, planted a bomb on that plane.
And the darkest part is that Zhou Enlai actually found out about the assassination plot beforehand.
Yeah.
But instead of, grounding the flight or alerting the authorities to save the crew, he simply changed his own travel plans. He let the plane take off and he let it blow up.
It's just brutal.
He let innocent people die, including the captain, Captain Jatar, who they found still strapped to his seat in the wreckage, just to maximize the international outrage and bad public relations against Taiwan.
It was a very ruthless calculation. But initially, Beijing suspected that India might have been somewhat complicit in the assassination attempt, or at least negligent, which caused a massive diplomatic freeze between the two nations.
Right. So Zhou Enlai's trip to the ISI in Calcutta in 1956 wasn't just like a quest for better math.
No, not at all. It was a highly calculated olive branch to repair relations with India.
And it was also a dizzying, completely hypocritical reversal of their own policies. Here's where it gets really interesting. Back in 1951, Mahalanobis had cordially invited the Chinese to join an international statistical association.
A standard academic invite.
Yeah, and the Chinese Foreign Ministry aggressively rebuffed him. They formally declared that these international statistical societies were nothing more than fronts for imperialist spies.
Which was their standard line for anything Western adjacent. Fast forward 5 years, and Zhou Enlai is literally holding Mahalanobis' hands in his office, practically begging for an exchange of scholars.
It's wild. It's like watching a hyper-paranoid CEO whose own factory is burning down, suddenly knocking on his biggest rival's door, begging for their operational playbook.
That's a perfect analogy.
But there's this fascinating interaction during their meeting. Mahalanobis is explaining global statistics, and he lists the UK, the US, and the USSR as advanced. But Mahalanobis secretly knew the Soviet Union was, like, light years behind the US technologically. Why did he politely lie to the Premier of China?
Well, he was walking a very precarious political tightrope. Mahalanobis desperately wanted to promote his method, the sample survey.
Because it works.
Right. By taking that representative handful of sand, sample surveys offer incredible speed, financial economy, and accuracy. But he couldn't openly insult the Soviet methods to achieve that goal.
Because the Chinese revered the Soviets?
Exactly. They still deeply revere the USSR as their ideological big brother. If Mahalanobis insulted Soviet math, he would trigger an immediate ideological defensive reaction from Zhou. So he had to gently guide them toward reality without bruising their political egos.
And his diplomacy actually worked. In 1958, China sent 2 brilliant English-speaking scholars, Wu Hui and Gong Jinyao, to study at the ISI in India.
And they were absolutely stunned by what they found.
Yeah, not just mathematically, but culturally, right? As foreign nationals, they were allowed to just sit in on official Indian government meetings where data problems and agricultural deficits were openly debated.
Which is standard in a democracy.
Right, but in China, that level of transparency, especially in front of foreigners, would be punished as espionage.
Without a doubt. So China now possessed this incredible new tool, the sample survey. It was fast, it was cheap, and it was highly accurate. But before they could deploy it to measure their own economy, they ran headfirst into an insurmountable wall.
The orthodox Marxist philosophy.
Exactly. This is where we see mathematical reality violently collide with dogma.
Yeah, because orthodox Marxism is built heavily on historical determinism. It dictates that human history follows a very strict mathematically predictable path, ultimately leading to the inevitable collapse of capitalism and the triumph of communism.
That's the core belief.
Right, so in that rigid worldview, there is absolutely no room for unpredictable events, random variables, or statistical uncertainty. I mean, if history is a train on a set track to utopia, you don't need a steering wheel, and you certainly don't need a dashboard showing a check engine light.
That ideological rigidity created an environment of sheer terror for actual scientists. Think about Mstislav Keldysh, the president of the Soviet Academy of Sciences.
Oh, the rocket guy.
Yes, exactly. He was a brilliant mathematician, completely capable of running advanced probability models. But he privately confessed to Mahalanobis that he strictly applied his mathematical uncertainty models to aerodynamics and to the physics of rockets and airplanes. He absolutely refused to apply them to economics.
Because getting the math wrong on a rocket just means the rocket crashes, you adjust the fin and try again. But getting the math right on the economy, if that math showed a deficit, meant you were contradicting the state.
Precisely. Keldysh admitted he avoided economic statistics simply to keep himself out of the gulag.
Just self-preservation.
Yeah, and that wasn't an irrational paranoia. One of his own brothers was shot, and another narrowly avoided the same fate, under suspicions of being anti-Soviet spies.
Yeah.
The threat of death for ideological nonconformity was just ever-present.
And it created a literal iron curtain between mathematical statistics and social science. Like, look at Professor Xiaoli Meng, who later went on to teach at Harvard.
Right, a brilliant modern statistician.
Yeah, he earned both a bachelor's and a master's degree in statistics in China without ever seeing a histogram or a stem and leaf plot or looking at a single real-world data point.
That's hard to even comprehend that.
It was entirely abstract theory divorced from reality. And by 1959, the new head of China's State Statistical Bureau, Jia Qun, officially declared that statistics were a weapon of class struggle and that they certainly should not be a mere display of objective facts.
They literally criminalized objectivity.
So what does this all mean? It's literally like a pilot flying a commercial jet and refusing to look at the fuel gauge because the official airline manual promises the plane is fully fueled. They essentially made mathematical uncertainty illegal.
That is the fatal flaw in the entire apparatus. If the prevailing state ideology dictates that collectivized farming, forcing everyone into massive agricultural communes, will absolutely produce record-breaking crop yields, then the data moving up the chain has to reflect that success.
Or else.
Right. If you are a local official and you report a bad harvest, you aren't just submitting bad data. You are committing political treason. You are saying the chairman's ideology is fundamentally flawed.
And that war on objective reality didn't just stay in academic circles or sterile planning meetings. It became the driving force of the Great Leap Forward beginning around 1958. This is where statistics mutated from bad math into pure, lethal fiction.
Yes, it created what was known as the wind of exaggeration.
Which is just a chilling term.
Local officials, terrified of being purged or labeled rightist traitors, began inventing agricultural yields that literally defied the physical laws of nature. In 1959, communes went from claiming 10,000 caddies per mu of grain, which is a traditional measurement of density, to 36,900.
Which is already crazy.
And then eventually, one remote commune in Guangxi claimed an impossible harvest of 130,000 caddies per mu.
To put 130,000 caddies per mu into perspective for you, that implies a crop density so thick that a child could literally sit on top of the wheat stalks without falling through to the ground.
It defies the physical laws of space, water, and photosynthesis.
It's botanically impossible. In fact, local officials actually staged propaganda photos doing exactly that, placing children on these tightly packed benches hidden in the wheat to prove their numbers. It was purely an exercise in competitive lying to please Beijing.
And the central leadership was completely insulated from the truth on the ground. There's a staggering anecdote about Zhu Enlai visiting a farm during this period.
Oh, the model worker story.
Right. A local cadre gives him an obviously inflated fake grain number. Zio sees right through him, dismisses the official, and says, "Let me talk to an honest model worker." He pulls aside a peasant named Bao Yud, hoping for the unvarnished truth, and Bao Yud looks at the premier and gives him the exact same fake number.
Because the peasants had already been heavily coached by local officials. I mean, if that farmer told the premier the truth, the moment Zhu Zhanlei got back in his car and drove away, that farmer would be severely punished, or worse.
The tragedy of this massive data failure is perfectly captured by an anonymous Chinese intellectual of the era. They noted a bizarre dichotomy. At the local level, the peasants and town officials knew exactly how much they were lying.
Yeah, they knew the silos were empty.
They knew the grain wasn't there.
Yeah.
But they didn't know the national total. Meanwhile, the central authorities in Beijing had this massive, aggregated nationwide total, but they hadn't the slightest idea that every single microscopic data point beneath it was an absolute fabrication.
And anyone who tried to pop that bubble of fabrication was destroyed. Look at the tragic fate of Peng Dehuai. He was the Minister of Defense, right? A highly decorated war hero from the Long March in the Korean War.
A very respected figure.
Yeah. During a massive political conference in 1959, Mao explicitly encouraged his leadership to speak their minds openly. So Peng takes him at his word. He writes a private letter to Chairman Mao, warning him about this wind of exaggeration and calling the impossibly high production targets a petty bourgeois frenzy.
But Mao harbored a deep personal grudge against Peng. During the Korean War, which Peng commanded, Mao's favorite son was killed in an American airstrike.
Ah, right.
Mao never forgave Peng for failing to protect his son. When Mao received this private letter criticizing the Great Leap Forward, he weaponized it. He read Peng's private constructive letter out loud to the entire conference to publicly humiliate and purge him.
For a private letter.
Peng Dehuai was stripped of his rank, tortured, and handed a life sentence simply for suggesting that agricultural statistics should reflect physical reality.
Wait, hold on. I understand the psychology of an individual lying on paper to save their life or to avoid the gulag. But logically, how does that nationwide illusion survive the winter?
What do you mean?
I mean, you can't eat a fake statistic. If a commune claims they have 1 million tons of wheat, but the actual silos are completely empty, doesn't the central government immediately realize they've been duped the moment they try to bake bread? How does the facade not instantly crumble?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of how this specific command economy functioned, we see the fatal lack of a feedback loop. The central government didn't send independent auditors to verify the silos. They just demanded their predetermined share of the paper success.
Oh, wow.
Let's look at the actual math from the source data in 1959. The state confidently predicted they would produce 525 million tons of grain. Local officials, trapped in this wind of exaggeration, eagerly claimed they produced 281 million tons.
Okay.
But the actual physical reality in the dirt, they only produced 170 million tons.
So the state thinks they have this massive surplus, but they are actually running a massive deficit.
Exactly. The entire system was designed to heavily reward exaggerated successes and ruthlessly punish anyone who demanded an audit. The feedback loop was completely severed.
And when that illusion finally inevitably collided with physical reality, the results were catastrophic. The government's response to the empty silos wasn't to admit their data models were wrong. It was to violently enforce the lie.
Yes.
This led directly to the Great Famine from 1959 to 1961, resulting in anywhere from 16.5 to 30 million deaths. It remains the worst famine in human history by total population loss.
The mechanism of that starvation is incredibly cruel, because the central government in Beijing chose to believe the falsified sky-high yields, they set impossibly high state procurement quotas.
Based on food that didn't exist.
Exactly. They demanded a huge percentage of what they assumed was a record-breaking harvest to feed the cities. So state enforcers went into the rural villages and violently seized whatever actual meager grain the peasants had managed to grow. They ripped the seed grain right out of the farmers' hands, leaving the people who grew the food to starve to death.
It gets even darker. During this exact time of mass starvation, the central government actively increased total grain exports.
That's hard to believe.
Between 1957 and 1959, grain exports rose from 1.9 million tons to 4.1 million tons. They were literally putting food on boats and shipping it out of a starving country to repay loans to the USSR and buy heavy industrial equipment.
All of it designed to keep up the geopolitical appearance that the Great Leap Forward was a stunning success.
It's estimated that the 9.6 million tons exported over those 3 years could have fed up to 38.9 million people.
This is where the tragedy of the unused sample survey becomes so agonizing. If China had fully embraced the mathematical tools that Wu Hui and Gong Jianyao studied in India with Mahalanobis, this famine could have been detected and mitigated.
Because of the speed of sampling.
Exactly. The core advantage of random sampling is immense speed combined with high accuracy. By simply testing small, random subsets of farms across the country, the drastic food shortage would have become mathematically undeniable within a single month.
I hear that, and, I see how the math works, but putting myself in the shoes of a local statistician in 1959, I have a genuine question here.
Sure.
Even if they had perfect sample surveys that undeniably showed a massive food deficit, would it have actually mattered? I mean, if the guy reading the survey results knows that reporting a deficit will get him labeled a rightist traitor and tortured, just like Peng Dehuai, wouldn't he just strike a match and burn the accurate survey anyway?
It is a profound, deeply human point. And the author of the research grapples with this exact limitation. The Chinese historian Yang Zhisheng put it perfectly when describing this era. He said, every official is a slave facing upward and a dictator facing downward.
A slave facing upward, a dictator facing downward. Wow.
It's powerful, right? It would be naive to think a culture of absolute paralyzing fear could be cured purely by better statistical formulas. However, the speed and the undeniable aggregate accuracy of sample surveys might have made the dissenting voices within that massive bureaucracy loud enough and unified enough to force the leadership's hand before tens of millions of people perished.
That brings us right back to the modern day and to you listening right now. Because this deep dive isn't just a grim history lesson about agrarian policies in the 1950s.
No, it's highly relevant today.
It's an enduring reminder of what happens when leadership at any level demands data that solely confirms their pre-existing beliefs. Whether you are running a massive nation, leading a corporate division, or just managing a small team, if you create information silos and build a culture that punishes people for delivering bad news, your organization will eventually collapse under the weight of reality.
This raises an important question for our modern era. Today, we don't rely on hand-cranked brass calculators, right? We rely on incredibly powerful algorithms and artificial intelligence to make our biggest logistical decisions.
Oh, for sure. AI is everywhere.
But if those AI models are being trained on data that modern governments or corporations silently manipulate to generate good PR or to fit a specific ideological narrative, are we unknowingly building a digital automated version of the Great Leap Forward's wind of exaggeration?
What a chilling thought to leave on. If the inputs are manipulated lies, the outputs are just incredibly fast, highly confident lies. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to continually question the numbers you see every day, look for the unvarnished reality behind the polished statistics, and please, whatever you do, take off the blindfold before you start driving.